Hello everyone and welcome back to another Blender fluid simulation tutorial. Today we're going to be going over how to make this animation, covering the basics of a water source and collisions in fluid simulations. Let's get started. To start off here, I'm going to press Shift and then A to open up my add menu. Then I'm going to left click a cube, going to select object, come down to quick effects and then left click quick liquid. The reason I'm doing this is it will set up some of the domain settings automatically so I can get straight into things. Now I'm going to left click this cube and press X to delete. You'll see that the particles are still here. All we need to do to fix that is update our domain. So I'm going to left click my domain, which is this bigger cuboid, left click on this panel here, which is my physics properties panel, and I'm going to press one of the arrow keys on the keyboard. I'm going to change the resolution and then change it back, left click forward, and now you can see those particles are gone. So what I've essentially done is updated the cache, so it's now what we need it to be. Brilliant. Now we're going to create a new cube, so I'm going to press Shift and then A, open up the add menu, left click cube, and I'm going to left click this -Y up here so I can have a look at the side view. Then I'm going to press S to scale, and I'll take it to about here. Then I'm going to press S and Z to bring it in like this. Then I'm going to click this Z to look at the top view. I'm going to press S and X, and I'm going to scale it across the X-axis. I'm going to scale it a little bit more in the Z, so S and Z. Cool, I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to quickly do a bit of modeling here, so just going to press Tab on the keyboard. That's going to take us into edit mode. Then I'm going to press Ctrl R, which will create a loop cut, and I'm going to left click there. Then before I click anything else, I'm going to come down to this little menu down here. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to change the number of cuts to 2 just by pressing that arrow. Then to select one of these loops, I'm going to press Alt, left click, making sure I'm either in vertices select mode, which is 1 on the keyboard, or edge select mode, which is 2 on the keyboard. Then I'm going to press G twice and slide this along. Again, I'm going to come into X mode so I can see it from the side here, and I'm just going to pull it so I make a nice kind of square shape here. And then I'm going to press Alt left click on this one, and as you can see by doing that, I've selected this loop. Back into side view, and I'm going to press G twice, move it along, and about there should do nicely. Maybe adjust it a bit more. Brilliant. Now I'm going to press 3 on the keyboard. It's going to bring me into face select mode. I'm just going to move my viewport a bit. I'm going to select this top dot here, and then shift left click this top dot here, and up select these 2 top faces. You can move about to make sure it really is the top 2 faces you've selected. That's quite important. And now all we're going to do is press E, and then it'll usually go to Z by default, but if not, you press Z twice and just pull this up. Then I'm going to press S and then X, and that's going to scale things along the X-axis. With these 2 faces still selected, I might press G and Z to pull up a bit more, and that should do nicely for now. Next up, before we do any more fluid settings, I'm going to make this pipe, which is going to make this object here rotate. So I'm going to press Shift and then A to open my add menu. I'm going to left click cylinder. Then I'm going to left click this X, it's going back into side view. Then I'm just going to press S, and that will scale it down, and I'll just move it to around here. Then I'm going to press G and Z, pull this down, I'll put it about there. Then I'm going to press Tab to enter edit mode, and I'm going to select this bottom face with left click. Okay, making sure the right face is selected. I'll come back into my side view, press G and then Z. I'm going to pull it up to around here. Now to finish up this object, I'm going to press I to inset. And essentially what that's doing is creating a circle within this circle face. Then with that face still selected, the middle face, I'm going to press E and then Z. I might have to press it twice to just pull it down here, and I'll come back into my side view, and I'm going to just press G and Z, pull it down. At this point here, I'm going to left click my pipe object again. I'm going to press S and then Shift Z, which will scale on every axis apart from the Z axis. I'm going to make it a bit wider, but there should do nicely. Then I'm going to left click this object here, Shift left click my pipe, and then press Ctrl and then P. Then I'll left click object, and that will pair this object to the pipe. Then with the pipe selected, I can press G and Z and I can move it down or up. So I'm probably going to move it to around here, and I'm going to go into tab so I get into edit mode again, and I'm just going to bring down that face a little bit further. Even if it goes below the domain, that's fine. I can go a little bit below, it's no problem. Brilliant. So now we're going to go ahead, take a break from modeling and focus on doing some more fluid settings. So in object mode, which you can see up here, I'm going to press Shift and then A to open the add menu, and under mesh I'm going to left click cube and then going to scale this cube down. So I'll left click X so I can see it in the side view, S to just scale it down on all axes, and I'm going to make it just a bit smaller than the edges of this mesh. Then I'm going to press S and Z to scale it down on the Z axis here to maybe about there, should do nicely. G and then Z to pull it down, there. Now as you can see, I'm making sure there is a gap between this object, which is going to be our fluid, or the source of our fluid, and this effector here, which is going to be a fluid collision, okay? So it's nicely in the middle, which is exactly where I want it to be. Before we add any fluid settings, we're actually going to need to split this into two, because we can't make it go both directions at the same time. So with this cube selected, left click, I'm going to press tab to enter edit mode. Then I'm going to press 2 in the keyboard, so I go into edge select mode. Then I'll press Control and then R, and I'm going to left click in the middle here, then just right click, and that will make sure that edge loop stays in the center. Then I'm going to press 3 on the keyboard, and that's going to take me into face select mode. Then I'm going to hold down Alt and left click this here. You might need to do it a few times until you get the right one. So left click away, and I'll try again. And there we go. And that's selected this side here. Then I'm going to press Shift, left click here. I'm going to press right click, separate by selection. And what that's done is turn these into two separate objects, which is exactly what we want. Now we don't want to move these objects at all, we just want to keep them like this, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with this object still selected, I'm going to press Shift and then left click this object. Then I'm going to Shift left click this object here, which is going to contain our water source. And then I'm going to press Control and then P, and then I'm going to left click object. Now that's going to make these two cuboids here attached to this. So when I rotate this, the cuboids follow with it. And because this object is parented to this tube here, when I rotate this tube, it will follow. I'm going to left click this cube here, and I'm going to press G and X on 1. And as you can see, when I press that, it will go towards the left, which means we're going to need to make this inflow on the minus X axis. So if that sounds confusing, don't worry, just follow the settings and you'll be fine. So I'm going to left click with this object selected, fluid here, which is inside our physics properties panel. I'm going to change the fluid type to flow, flow type to liquid, and I'm going to change it from geometry to inflow. And what that means is this is pretty much like a water source block, like in Minecraft. Then I'm going to left click initial velocity, and this is essentially where the water will be coming from. So I want this water to come out on the x-axis, which is this red line, but as you saw, if I pressed G, X and then 1, the cube by default would move this way, which means the positive x-axis is going to the left. But because we want this cube to come out to the right, that means we'll need to make the initial velocity on the minus x-axis. So I'm just going to left click this here and then type in -3, then press enter, and that's our initial velocity for this one done. Then I'm going to left click this flow source panel, and left click is planar. It's really important because this mesh has a hole in it where that orange dot is, which is called the origin if you don't know. And is planar pretty much means a mesh which isn't closed. If you don't understand what I mean by that, don't worry. Then I'm going to left click this cuboid here, left click fluid, change the type flow from flow type from smoke to liquid, flow behavior to inflow, and I'm going to check is planar under flow source, check initial velocity, and as we know the x-axis positively is going this way, so I'm just going to change this initial x velocity to 3, or the water source from this cube to come out to the left here. Excellent. Now one problem we're going to have here is when this water comes out, it's just going to go straight onto the walls, Now this is kind of unavoidable because we're not going to make this a massive fluid simulation, but we want to make it look at least a little bit nicer. So I'm going to press S and then Shift and then Z, which is going to scale this object on every axis apart from the Z axis. And then I'm going to press 1.5, and that's given us a bit of a nicer container. Next up, we're going to do a little animation, which is going to make this object rotate. I might, with this object selected, press S, and scale it up a little bit to maybe about here should do nicely. If you do want to keep it smaller, you might need to turn up resolution divisions in the domain settings here, which we are going to turn up anyway, but you might need to turn them up even higher than we're going to turn them up to. Now I'm going to left click this pipe here. That looks nice how it is, but I'm going to left click this bottom face, G and Z, and pull this up a little bit. There we go. Now on frame 1, I'm going to press I, make sure it's just the pipe you have selected, and I'm going to left click rotation here in your insert keyframe menu. If you have auto keyframe register on, then you won't need to do the menu bit, but don't worry either way. Then I'm going to left click on 120, and I'm going to press R, Z, which will rotate on the Z axis. I'm going to type in 180, and that's going to rotate it 180 degrees. Then I'll press I again and left click rotation. I'm also going to come up into this output properties here. I'm going to change my frame rate here to 30 FPS. Now if I play this animation, you can see it's all rotating here. Now I'm going to left click on frame 240, press R, Z, 180 again. That's going to rotate it another 180 degrees. Then I'm going to press I and then left click rotation. Now the last thing I need to do on the timeline here is I'm going to left click this thing called end, which is the end frame. I'm going to type in the number 360, since this animation is going to be 360 frames long. Then I'm going to left click frame 360 in this timeline, and I'm going to press R, Z, 180. Press enter, I, rotation. Now before we do anything else, let's just check that our animation has worked here. So it looks good so far. So I just played through the whole animation, and as you can see, it seems to be playing nicely. Now to finish up this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and left click this liquid domain here. I'm going to tweak the settings here. But for an animation like this, if I baked this with resolution division of 32, nothing would show up because this object is too small here for 32 divisions. So I'm going to set my resolution division all the way up to 128. I'm going to put a comparison on screen here. So 64 should work for this animation as well, but it won't look too good, so I highly recommend doing 128. Although do keep in mind this will take longer to bake, and I can imagine it will take up more storage as well. So just keep those factors in mind. Then I'm going to scroll down and make sure liquid is on here. It should be on by default. I'm going to press left click on diffusion, and by default it will be set to water, which is what we want. Then I'm going to left click mesh here, and as you can see by doing that, it's turned the domain into a mesh. Then I'm going to come down and change the type from replay to all. And as you can see, the domain will return to just being a domain. Don't worry about that. That just means that it's not going to play in the viewport without baking it. Now a quick save reminder here. You should really have saved earlier, but I seem to have forgotten. I'm also going to left click this thing called is resumable, and essentially what this does, this is really useful. When I'm baking my animation, let's say I need to pause the bake to do something else, I can pause it and then resume it at a later time, so it's very useful. Now I'm going to left click this output folder. I'm going to create a folder somewhere where I can find it again. So I'm just going to come to my 3D projects folder. I'm going to create a new folder by left click this button here. I'm just going to call it tutorial fluid bake, and I'm just going to press accept. Then I'm going to left click the end frame in the bake here, and I'm going to line it up with our timeline, so 360. Since this animation is going to be 360 frames long. Now before we go ahead and bake, we need to add our collisions. So I'm going to left click this object here, and I'm going to left click fluid, making sure we're in physics properties here. Now I'm going to left click type, and I'm going to left click effector. And what that's going to do is turn this into a collision which will react with our liquid. Then I'm going to left click this pipe here, and I'm going to do the same thing. So left click fluid, change type to effector, and it will be collision by default. Excellent. Now we've done that, we can go ahead and bake. Do keep in mind, because we've set the domain resolution division quite high, it will take quite a while to bake. But we're going to pause it midway because we have is resumable on, so we can check and see if it's working. So I'm just going to come down to my cache settings, and before I press left click bake all, I'm just going to make sure my file is saved. So you can just press Ctrl and then S to save, or you can left click file and left click save here. The reason we do this is because sometimes bakes can crash, and it's good to make sure that our file is saved before we do a process like baking. So now I'm going to left click bake all, and it's just going to get started here. I'll be back when the bake has gone along a few frames. Alright everyone, so as you can see, my bake is now approaching 30 frames. It's just been going through all these different frames and calculating what the fluid will look like. Just going to press escape to pause it, and you might need to give it a second. There we go, and now that's the bake being paused, or cancelled as it will say. Now as you can see, even at 128 divisions, there is still a bit of clipping here, but for the sake of time and resources, I'm just going to leave it at 128. Of course, if you want a much nicer looking result, you can just come up to liquid and change the resolution division to a higher number. Just keep in mind, the higher it is, the longer it will take. Now I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, so I'm just going to go ahead and left click resume. I'm going to let that finish up, and I'll be back when it has gone all the way to frame 360. Good job guys, we're almost done. Alright everyone, so it's been a couple of hours and that's the bake finished. So I'm now going to go ahead and look through the animation to see how it's looking. So I'll just press space. It's going to be quite laggy, but we can have a kind of light look. So I'm just going to skip through a few frames here, take a look how it's looking at different stages. Oh, it's going to look crazy there. Okay, it looks like this is going to give quite an interesting result. Awesome. So I've had a little look through and I think I'm quite happy with that. So let's go ahead and quickly add some materials. So first thing I'm going to do is press Ctrl and S to save. Then I'm going to go ahead and left click this viewport shading, which is up here. And I think I'm just going to create, well, first of all, I'm going to press X to delete this material because I want to create my own one. I'm going to press plus new. I'm going to turn roughness to 0. And I'm going to turn transmission to 1. And I'm going to turn on screen space refraction to make it see-through. Then I want you guys to come up to render properties up here. Turn on ambient occlusion and bloom if you're using Eevee like I am. You also need to turn on screen space refractions or reflections. Turn on reflection and turn off half-res trace, and that will allow you to see glass or see-through materials in Eevee. I'm also going to want to come down under cube. I'm going to press this I here, and that's going to remove it from my scene because we couldn't really see the water before. And I'm also going to turn off this camera, which is really important because these two cubes, which are our water source, will still show in the render if we don't turn that off. So make sure these two objects here are turned off. Ideally, I should have given them an appropriate name earlier, such as water source. So I'll maybe just do that just now. Now you can change the color of the water if you like. You could make it any color really, but I'm just going to turn my saturation to 0 because I just want this to be a nice clear water, since that's how water actually is. Although sometimes I do like to add a blue tint just for artistic effect. I'm now going to left click this here. I'm going to press plus new, and I think I'm going to create a nice dark material here for this. Right there should do nicely. And I'll turn the roughness to maybe just leave it as it is actually. Then I'll create another material here. I'll maybe left click this object, right click, shade smooth, then left click the green triangle, left click normals and turn on auto smooth. And that will make it look much nicer. And then I'm going to change this material color to maybe a nice grayish color like that. Yeah, pretty happy with how that's looking. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip to a frame where there's loads of water on the ground. And now I'm going to use that to figure out where the floor is going to be. I've been notorious for making this mistake before, of making the floor a little bit away from the water, by accident of course. So today I'm going to make sure I do that right. So I'm going to press shift and then A, and then I'm just going to left click plane here, okay? Then I'm going to press G and Z with my plane selected, pull it down, and try and line it up nicely with the water. Make sure it doesn't go too high, because otherwise it will look like there's water clipping through the plane, and we don't want that. So then I'm just going to press S to scale, and I'll maybe line it up as accurately as I can with the edge of that water. And now you can see we have a nice plane underneath. Now I'm going to have this all the same color, so I'm just going to press Alt D. Alt D is different from Shift D because when I press Alt D, the data of this object will be the same, meaning it will use less rendering power, even if only by a little. So I'm going to press R, X, and then 90, and I'm just going to press Enter, G and Z to move it up. I'm going to press X to go into my side view so I can see what I'm doing, and I'll move that along. Now this can be hard to get just right, but even if there's a little mistake, I'm not going to worry too much because that's something you guys can tweak yourself. Then I'm going to press Alt D again, with this plane selected, R, Z, 90, then D, X, pull it along. Now we've got something nice to work with here. I'm going to briefly make this color really vibrant just so I can try line up the plane as best I can. Then I'll do the same on this side. Awesome, so I've gone over rendering and lighting in other videos before, so I'm going to leave a link to a basic video you can follow there. See you at the end.